reminded that I didn't bother to introduce myself. My name is Kurt Richter. I'm from New York, but I've been living in Helsinki now for just about 20 years, a little over. And Raphael invited me to participate in the festival, I guess, about 3 years ago. Tom, good to see you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Very nice camera setup you have there. I'm impressed.
I've got a very messy background, so it just helps to blur it
I
out.
know it's circles of confusion. It's all out of focus. Well, I don't want to set up too much, but this is a very thoughtful series, and it's not going out wandering with your camera. Clearly, you've gone out with a preconceived idea and done a very powerful series of photographs. So without anything more than that as a setup, Tom, please go ahead and show us your work and tell us how you did it.
Cool. Great. Let me share this with you. Brilliant. Can you all see that? Fab. So first of all, I just want to thank you so much for having me here today. It's total privilege and pleasure to do something like this. It's kind of my first time at a photo festival, and very excited, a little bit nervous. It's kind of amazing to be talking alongside just an amazing set of photographers, people I've looked up to for years. Laura's project was amazing. So yeah, thanks for having me. Cool. So today I'm going to talk to you about my collaborative project with Featherwax Studios called Porta, which is a series of images originally shot in India and then relocated to a vast series of sort of surreal landscapes. So a bit about me to begin with. For the last 10 years or so, I've been working in and out of full-time freelance photography roles and comms roles in international development charities. And I've got a background in sort of languages and anthropology. So my photography has mainly been social documentary type work and portraiture for NGOs in international relief and development, with a bit of commercial work too. So the origins of this project go back to 2015, when my wife, Sarah, who was a GP trainee at the time, was given a training opportunity in Calcutta. So I quit my full-time comms job at an NGO in London, and we moved to India for a year. So I've traveled a bit, but I've never been to India before. We didn't really know anyone, and I didn't really have much of a plan. Many of you will know this, that Calcutta has this sort of powerful set of associations and stereotypes, like dramatically crumbling colonial architecture, scenes of extreme poverty, Mother Teresa, things like that. And these are often reinforced by Western gaze and photographers. So I was kind of mindful about reproducing things like that, and decided to kind of create a bit of a daily ritual of walking around different parts of the city with my camera. The intention being to kind of get to know the city a little bit. And as any photographer knows, having a camera is just a great excuse to talk to people. So I've not got the skills of a street photographer at all. I'm certainly not fast or bold enough, but I use the camera as a way of making visual notes, and it helped to slow down like the frantic pace of everything, and certainly calm me down a little bit. Yeah, Calcutta is an iconic city. It's full of history and a real strong sense of its own identity. But I really wanted to focus in on something specific and concrete, my time there. And I've always been drawn to markets and food culture. I think it's an extraordinary gateway to what culture loves and what it holds dear. And work has always been a subject of interest for me. And I think the subject is interesting for Calcutta too. It's got this great reputation for education, but for people who kind of go through that system, many then often end up leaving the country or going to the kind of big cities like Delhi and Bangalore and Mumbai, Hyderabad. And I think some of that is changing now. But my first project in the city was a portrait series focusing on market sellers in Newmarket. So Newmarket is probably the most famous covered market in Calcutta. Has around 4,000 stalls. It dates back to the late 19th century. It's nearly 150 years old. And it's just this huge building with the kind of decaying Victorian railway station kind of vibe to it. But I wanted to show the pride and the vibrancy that the place held. The market sellers were really proud to be there, and they took great care over their stalls and displays with just sort of beautiful patterns of the fruit and veg and the various things they sold, and they were kind of enthroned by these scenes. And because of the nature of the building itself, like the lighting was quite interesting. It's got a vast sort of roof space above it, which is very dark, and then quite harsh, bright, bare light bulbs lighting the product. So it kind of creates these intimate little vignettes around each stall, and I just wanted to capture something of that kind of intimacy. Death and dilapidation obviously is a feature in this work too. It's kind of hard to ignore in a space like this, but there's also a sort of sense of the theatrical there too, where the crumbling nature of the infrastructure creates this sort of canvas for life to happen in a very free and dynamic kind of way. And obviously when resources are limited, people are often very innovative and creative, and there's a sort of aesthetic quality to that I wanted to capture. So I followed this trail through to Borough Bazaar, which is the largest or one of the largest wholesale markets in Asia. It's a bustling port-like environment where kind of vast quantities of goods come up the Hooghly River or via lorries, and then they were distributed into the city or West Bengal or beyond. And it's just an amazing place. It's such a thoroughfare of goods and people, and it's almost always bustling in some shape or form night and day. And I was exploring it one day and kind of shouldering my way through the crowds, and I looked up and just saw this kind of towering set of crates kind of almost like floating above the heads of the crowd, and I was just gobsmacked by this sight. And behind that there was another sort of set of kind of towering objects, and this was how I first encountered the porters. It wasn't through their bodies, it was through the towering items of things that they carried sort of precariously on their heads. And I was struck by the visual heroics of this work, but they were lost in the crowd most of the time, and I wanted to find a way to sort of celebrate them. So I found a place in the market that was reasonably quiet, and over the course of a couple of weeks photographed the porters against a background that kind of changed with every sitting, really, because the landscape was changing. Porters would come in with sort of vast pallets of plywood, and there were barrels of wood, so we kind of had to maneuver our sort of scene around a little bit. And but we shot a series, and given the general busyness of the environment, I was sort of pleased to have got this far really with the project. But it hadn't quite achieved, I suppose, the visual message that I was going for. So the project then lay dormant until the end of 2020, when I collaborated with a retoucher called Featherwax Studios to have another go at this series. The porters were cut out the scenes by Featherwax and then sort of relocated to various landscapes. And I think as a result, the stories and the images become much more storied than before. The extra space around each porter sort of not only helps to draw closer attention to each person and their load, but it also invites the viewer to imagine who they are and what they might be doing there. I didn't have much time to speak to each porter as they passed. They were very busy, and the items they carried were very heavy. I didn't want to cause too much disruption to their work. Ordinarily, when working with subjects, I spend a lot more time talking to people and hearing their stories. But in this case, it just wasn't it's practical to do so. But it was really important to me that each person was happy to be photographed, and some did stay a while to chat. And in the course of these discussions, I sort of found out that many were internal migrant labourers, often travelling from some of the poorest surrounding states, such as Bihar, to find work in Kolkata. So the kind of visual relocation of the porters to these new environments so hopefully then makes a bit more sense of that journey and makes the travel sort of their story much more explicit. And while the scenes are now kind of partly a work of fiction, they add a layer of detail and are able to reveal the kernel of truth that sort of the more straightforward documentary images I don't think were quite able to achieve. And then the cargo that each porter carries above their heads also sort of transforms in meaning too. No longer sort of representing just the literal items that each porter is carrying. The cargo becomes something more like a backpack, or might represent something like the weight or burdens they have to bear as migrant workers. Yeah, so the life of a migrant worker is often full of challenges, leaving your home for long stretches of time, traveling to new places, encountering different languages and cultures. These things are often really positively associated for the privileged, but can place those without those safeguards into a much more precarious situation. So while I wanted these images to communicate something heroic about the jobs they were doing, I also wanted there to be a layer that communicates that sort of sense of precarity and dislocation. And in the midst of that, the bravery and courage that it takes to set out away from home, leaving loved ones behind, and finding a way to support themselves and their families. So I think there's something also at the heart of this idea that we can all relate to, that sense of carrying burdens in life, whether they're external or internal to our own psychology and the pressures we put on ourselves. Great. Yeah, so that's the project. It's evolved in unexpected ways. I didn't set out to work in a collaborative way, but there's something really interesting about letting other people tease out layers of meaning in a project. And I'm hugely indebted to the skills and vision of Fellow Wax Studios in crystallizing that meaning and bringing it to life in this project. Cool. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. That was a wonderful presentation. It's not often that people set it up with, you know, how you came to this point of doing that project, which is often, I think, you know, of interest, particularly to other photographers. I try if you're having a kind of discussion like this, it's open, to not get too technical, but it is a photo festival. So I can't help myself. The lighting in that is rather, it's very elegant, but I also know that you have to use a very broad light source outdoors. That's not easy lighting that you did. Just to point it out, I mean, you may have noticed that the light was different than the light in the background, and often it was a little bit brighter than the background light. I'm just speaking generally to the audience now. If they were looking at the pictures, that it does give it a somewhat surreal quality, because that you won't find that light in nature. But you said you didn't spend a lot of time with them. I can't imagine it didn't require a certain amount of time to have them get them in position and clearly had a dialogue with them. I mean, they didn't just, you know, stop for a second. I mean, it's unfortunate you can't see the pictures larger because you obviously engage them. It's a serious portrait. You know, what was that process for you to get them into that position and then sort of get them to disengage the camera in the whole process and address you, because that's what happened?
Yeah, and I suppose when I say sort of short period of time, these concepts are all relative, aren't they? I think ordinarily, you know, it takes me at least an hour to photograph someone. I'm kind of slow in the way I work. So, you know, we were probably spending somewhere around the region of sort of 10 or 15 minutes with each person. Or you know, if people really needed to go, then 5 minutes. And often it would be a matter of like, you know, saying hello to people as they walk past, and then maybe, you know, they'd put their items down and we'd help them, and we'd kind of just explaining ourselves. I wasn't there alone. I had my friend Sujatra Ghosh, who's a brilliant photographer and activist in his own right, and we were kind of muddling through together. But yeah, you know, it's a bit of back and forth. You set up for the ideal circumstances, don't you, when you're kind of lighting someone in the external environment, and then you just need to kind of move things around a little bit. And for each person. And so we would show people the pictures, and then they would kind of get the idea, and then we would take a few and we'd stop and we'd kind of go through them together, and just sort of people that way slowly got the idea of what we were up to. Because it's weird, like it's not an environment where you're seeing a lot of people taking photographs. It's Calcutta's a really photograph city, and you do see a lot of photographers around, but down this tiny little alleyway, which was a thoroughfare for these goods basically being taken off the river and then into the rest of the city. I was there with a really old light with a cable trailing across the ground, and someone holding on to this modifier so it doesn't blow over. So we were kind of we were a weird spectacle in our own right. And I suppose like Laura mentioned previously, it's just fun to have an opportunity to play with people and engage. And like the photographic process for me is one where that's where the magic happens for me. I think that I do like photography, but it's really the process is where I find the things get interesting, and you just get to kind of have fun with it. So it wasn't as quick as I maybe made out, but
It's okay.
as
I think we're all right now.
things go. Is everything all right?
Yeah, forgive me. I have kicked my foot at the wrong moment, at the wrong direction. I mean, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Don't worry, you're good. Good.
Yeah, I mean, it's rather striking. I mean, I guess you're setting yourself up to make it. You're very ambitious in what the image that you're trying to get. You're sort of working against a natural flow, I guess it would be my comment, to a absolutely stunning result. But I'm curious, I mean, you say it's around Calcutta. There's no evidence of any urban setting in any of the pictures that I recall.
Yeah, so that is the work. That is the work and the genius of the retoucher. So the landscapes are not, they weren't there in the moment. So those are those are different landscapes from different places that have been kind of yeah.
I was suspicious.
Yeah.
It looked like yeah.
And I try to be transparent about that, because I think especially within in the world of sort of photojournalism and documentary photography, that there is quite right anxiety around doctoring images and sort of so-called changing the truth. But this project had no such pretensions of being kind of realism in that sense, or certainly as the project evolved, it kind of happily cut ties with reality. But I think that sort of interplay of like the kind of the fictional environment with the porters who were shot in that environment is sort of where it became alive for me, and certainly began to be much more suffused with meaning than the original set of images were. Various people will interpret that in different ways, and that's sort of, that's part of the interest, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting topic. You don't hear it very often anymore, but people would really say, does the camera lie?
Yeah.
As if it had the capacity to have that kind of consciousness. If it's,
Yeah.
To me, that's just a laughable question. I mean, it's you might as well talk about a sinister spoon. I mean, it's an inanimate object. What you as a photographer brings to it. But I think part of that is that they see a photograph as a DNA molecule with reality, and it isn't really. No, yeah. Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm trying to lead you in to give your thoughts on it, because that is it. You will get cold on that, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that truth is precious, but also truth is complex, isn't it? And I think as a photographer, I think we almost need to be just really much more honest about all of the decisions that we make, whether it's lens, because the lens is changing the perspective with which you can see things and what fits in a frame, and your decisions about, when you take the picture and how you frame it, and then sort of how it's processed, and then how it's captioned and how it's placed afterwards. There are so many decisions that kind of are encountered along the photographic process that are, decisions which influence what and how is transplanted to the viewer. And I think, I suppose that we are getting much more, our visual literacy is growing as we see more pictures. And I think, in times of artificial intelligence and, the growing sort of CCTV presence and the way that images are, manipulated now, I think we are all going to need to sort of really step up our visual literacy about sort of calling out stuff that isn't real, but then also being okay with, making up things that sort of serve a different kind of truth or tell a different kind of story. And I think, as long as people aren't wedded to this idea that photography is, the truth as it happened. I mean, it's like a fraction of a second, isn't it? Life doesn't work that way, that we can pull a different face, in such a short space of time. And I think, I think that the conversation around what is photographic truth and our visual literacy is evolving. And I am nervous about putting myself in the firing line for kind of
you put yourself right in the crosshairs.
yeah. But I suppose that I feel like being transparent about the process is like part of.
Oh, I think it's a very interesting question, and it will only get more complicated as time goes on.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you very much. And again, I wish we had more time, but certainly a really wonderful series, and really interesting to hear your thoughts on it, the backstory of it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, great to have you. Thanks again.